If you haven't done so yet, please subscribe to the channel. And if you're enjoying these stories, there's a link below to buy me a cup of coffee. This is the Chassidic Story Project with Barak Hullman, podcasting from Jerusalem, Israel. This podcast is sponsored by listeners just like you. To become a supporter of this podcast, please go to HasidicStory.com, HASIDIC story.com. You'll never know, you'll never know, you'll never know, you'll never know. Shalom Aleichem, my sweetest friends. What an absolute pleasure to return to telling stories after the incredible Chagim. You know, for many years, I've known that in order to really appreciate all of the high holidays, you have to be on a very high spiritual level. You have to have big kelim, as we say, big vessels in order to handle all the light. And over the many years that I've been on the path of coming closer to Hashem, my vessels have certainly gotten bigger. I can't say yet that they're fully expanded. I guess they never actually will be. But besides the cooking, I do all the cooking for Yom Tov and Shabbos, and shopping. I think I pretty much handled the Chagim okay this year. And of course, we had the great miracle of the hostages, the living hostages, being returned. I actually ran into one of the listeners of the podcast on the street, and he said to me, "You have to change your intro." And I was surprised at first because the intro is, "You'll never know, what am I supposed to change?" And he said, "No, the hostages have been returned and the war is over." I don't know if he said the war is over. Of course the war is not over. I think only Trump believes that the war is over, and I'm not sure if he even believes that. But the hostages, the ones that survived, are home, and that is quite a miraculous thing. So I'm going to stop my dedication at the beginning of the podcast for the soldiers and the hostages, but everyone should know that it's really still there, because we all know soldiers that are serving on the front lines. We all have friends that have been injured or who have been killed, and families that need comforting. And we all see, at least over here in Israel, unfortunately, the strife between different sectors and views in society. And so all of the things that I've been dedicating the podcast to for the last 2 years continue, and Bezat Hashem, those that didn't survive, their bodies will be returned for a Kever Yisrael, for a kosher burial here in the land of Israel. On the one hand, it's a relief to end this dedication, something that I originally thought would only last for maybe 3 weeks, and certainly not 2 years. And on the other hand, it's a dedication that really never ends, unfortunately, until Mashiach comes probably. And so even though I won't be saying it after this podcast, you should know it's still there. So this week I have for you 3 stories. Originally I'd planned on telling just 2, but then I read another one, a little short one, and I figured I'd add that as well. The first story is about the great Rebbe, the Apter Rav, Rebbe Avraham Yoshua Heschel, who lived from 1748 to 1825 and was known as the Ohev Yisrael, the one who truly loved the Jewish people. And the Apter Rav at one point was in Mezhibuz. When you go to the shul of the Baal Shem Tov, you'll see on your way on the left-hand side a beautiful renovated building, and it says the shul of the Apter Rav. At first I didn't understand, because Apt is in Poland and Mezhibuz is in Ukraine, but at some point the Apter Rav was there, and then he moved to Poland. He's one of the great Rebbes, and once his Chassidim said to him, "Rebbe, may you live to 120 years old. But when your day comes, what are we supposed to write on your tombstone, on your matzevah?" And the Rebbe smiled softly and he said, "When I come before the heavenly court, they're going to ask me, 'Did you daven with all your heart?' And I'll have to answer them, 'I davened as hard as I could, but the truth is, I could have done better.' And then they'll ask me, 'And you're learning?' And I'll have to admit I studied Torah as best I could, but I could have learned more, and I could have done better. And then the court will ask me, 'Did you truly love God's people, the Jewish people, from the deepest depths of your heart?' And to that question, I will be able to answer, 'Yes, I did.' And so that is what I want you to write on my tombstone. Ohev Yisrael, the one who truly loved the Jewish people." One day, a poor Yiddele came to the Apter Rav in tears. He said, "Hey, the Rebbe, I'm mamish at my end. I owe a Polish nobleman 1,000 rubles, and he's threatening to kill me if I don't pay the rent by the end of the month. And I've been doing everything I could to find the money. But not only do I not have any money, I can't figure out how to get it. Please, Rebbe, you're my last hope. What am I supposed to do?" And the Apter Rav looked at this poor Jew, and he nodded his head, and then he took a piece of paper, and scribbled something on it, folded it up, and handed it to the poor man. He said, take this letter and travel quickly to Warsaw. There's a wealthy man there who's like my personal banker. Give him this letter. It tells you to give him the money that you need from my bank account. So the poor man thanked the Rebbe and immediately set off for Warsaw. And when he arrived and found the rich man's beautiful house, he knocked on the door. The servant said, what do you need? And he said, I have a letter here from the Apter Rav. So the rich man says, bring him in, bring him in. And the poor Jew stands there and hands him the letter. He says, the Apter Rav sends his greetings, and he asks that you withdraw 1,000 rubles from his bank account with you. And the wealthy Jew looked at this poor Yid, and he says, the Apter Rav? Of course I've heard of him, he's a great tzaddik, but I've never met him in my life, and I certainly don't have any of his money. Why would he have a bank account with me? Do I look like a bank? And the poor Jew just stood there and shrugged his shoulders, and he said, I don't know. The Rebbe told me. So the rich man was confused. You can see that there's a poor Jew standing in front of him. So he took out a bill of 10 rubles, and he hands it to this poor Jew. And he said, here you go. Rachavatlacha. But the poor Jew said, but the Rebbe said 1,000. That's another 990 rubles. I can't pay off my debt with 10 rubles. It's a matter of life and death for me. You don't understand. But the rich man really didn't understand. He just shook his head and slammed the door. And heartbroken, this poor Jew went back to the Apter Rav, told him everything that happened. The Rebbe said, I'm so sorry, my sweetest friend. Please don't lose hope. I have another banker friend. He's a rich man in the town of Brody. I want you to go to him, and I also have an account with him. Take this new letter, and Be'ezrat Hashem, he'll give you the money. So the poor man set out again, this time to Brody. And when he arrived at the rich man's home and handed over the letter, he said, the holy Apter Rav sends his greetings and asks that you give me 1,000 rubles from his bank account. And the wealthy Jew's eyes widened, and he said, the Heilige Apter Rav, he knows who I am? I've never met him before, but he's one of the greatest Rebbes alive, and he wants something from me? What an honor. Gewalt, what an honor. If he says he has an account with me, then apparently he does. He goes to his safe and takes out 1,000 rubles, hands it to the poor Jew, and says, please tell the Rebbe, thank you for allowing me to do this mitzvah. Now this poor Jew was under so much pressure and already broken from the first meeting where he only got 10 rubles. He burst out into tears, thanking the wealthy Jew. And the wealthy Jew just kept saying, thank you, my friend. He ran home, paid the Polish nobleman, and then went to the Rebbe to tell him what happened. Since the 10 rubles that he originally received was from the Rebbe's bank account, he gave it to the Rebbe and continued with his life. And from that day on, something strange happened. The rich man from Brody began to become wealthier and wealthier. Every business deal that he made more money. And sometimes people even wanted to pay him more than he thought that he deserved. He became so wealthy, it was beyond his wildest dreams. But the rich man from Warsaw, the one who had refused the letter from the Apter Rav, he soon lost everything. Every business deal that he made lost money, and eventually a fire broke out in his house. It burned to the ground with everything he had, and he and his family barely escaped with their lives. He became a beggar, walking from town to town, asking for money just so he could feed his family. And this went on for 10 long years, until eventually the former wealthy Jew, who was now a beggar, came to Apt and stood in the line of poor people waiting to see the Rebbe. The Apter Rav noticed him and called him aside, and he said, my sweetest friend, I know you. And the poor Jew said, Rebbe, I've never met you before. But the Apter Rav said, I know who you are. You once were very wealthy. Tell me, did you ever wonder why you lost all your money so quickly? And the man broke down crying, and he said, Rebbe, I've never thought of anything else since the time I lost everything. Please, Rebbe, why was I punished? Why did I lose everything? And the Apter Rav said, no, my friend, you misunderstand. This is not a punishment. Do you remember 10 years ago, a poor Yiddele came to you asking for 1,000 rubles to be withdrawn from my bank account? And the poor Jew nodded. He said, of course, Rebbe. It was after that I started losing everything. The Rebbe said, when my soul was about to come into this world, Hashem said to me, you're going to be a Rebbe, and many people are going to come to you for help. And for that, you're going to need a lot of money. So I'm going to make you very rich, so you can give money to everyone who asks. But I said, Ribono Shel Olam, Master of the Universe, if I'm going to be a Rebbe, I don't want to deal with money and business. I want you to appoint other Jews to be my bankers. you'll make them wealthy. And whenever I need to give money to somebody, I'll simply withdraw the money from the bank account that I have with those wealthy Jews. And Hashem agreed. And then the Apter Rav looked at the poor Jew, and he said, you were one of those people chosen to hold my money. That's why you were so wealthy. But when a poor Jew came to you, and you refused to honor my withdrawal, Hashem simply moved my bank account to someone else. And that's why you became poor. The former wealthy Jew said, but Rebbe, I didn't know that. That's not fair. Had I known, I would have given the money. So the Rebbe went to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a 10-ruble bill. He hands it to the beggar. And the beggar says, Rebbe, I'm very grateful for the money, but what's going on here? And the Rebbe said, for sure you remember. You gave 10 rubles to my chassid 10 years ago. This is the same bill that you gave him all the way back then. I want you to take it not as tzedakah, but as trust. A trust that you're going to use this 10 rubles wisely. You're going to make an investment, some type of small trade or business deal. And Be'ezrat Hashem, you'll be wealthy again. And when I need to make a withdrawal from my bank account with you, this time may you do it from a place of joy and health. The beggar was crying, was so broken. He took the 10 rubles, bought a little something, knew exactly how much he could resell it for in another town, because as he was begging for those 10 years, he was making mental notes. If I could buy something from this town and resell it over there, I could have made so much money. But he literally only had enough money to have food for himself and his family, and he never had enough to invest in anything. But after all those years of wandering, he knew exactly how to make a fortune again. And little by little, his fortune returned, and he never forgot the lesson or the compassion behind it. Every morning, poor people would line up outside of his home, and he would greet each one as if they were a brother or a sister. He helped them out not just with coins, but with advice, trying to help them build businesses, trying to study crafts, any way to live with dignity. And when the Apter Rav would ever send word for help, he would answer immediately saying, this is not my money, I'm only keeping it for when the Apter Rav needs it. May we all merit to become the faithful keepers of the Rebbe's accounts, to use what heaven entrusts to us for kindness, generosity, and the love of our fellow Jews. Shomer, Shomer Yisrael, Shemo Sherit Yisrael, Yan Yovan Yisrael, Yan Yovan Yisrael, Yan Yovan Shomer Yisrael, La la la, ya la la, ya la la, So I did a little search to see if it was the yard set of the Apter Rav, because the next story is also connected to the Apter Rav. And how did I choose these stories? They were unrelated to each other completely. I just read stories that I liked over Yom Tov, and I said, okay, I'll tell that on the podcast, and I'll tell that on the podcast. And I didn't even remember that the first story was about the Apter Rav. The second story comes to us from Rabbi Avraham Twersky of blessed memory, who was named and is a direct descendant of the Apter Rav. And Rabbi Twersky, of course, everybody who knew him or has read his books or listened to his talks knows that he was a psychiatrist and that he dealt with people that had addictions. And he wrote a beautiful book from generation to generation. And this story appears in the book. It's not so much a direct Chassidic story, but the message, of course, is very Chassidic. And when it comes through the Twersky family, it carries that as well. Rabbi Twersky said that many times people would come to him dissatisfied with their lives, and they would think that happiness would come if they would change jobs or spouses or where they lived. But rarely do they try to change what really works, a change inside of themselves. And he said when he was a child, his mother used to tell him bedtime stories. And there was one story, this story I'm about to tell you, whose meaning only reached him many years later. And now I'm going to share it with you. There was once a stonecutter who earned his living by cutting rocks out of a mountain. It was hard, exhausting work, work that broke his body and at times his spirit as well. And he often complained about his life. He would say, "Why do I have to do such a lowly job? Why do some people get to live in comfort and honor while I have to break my bones from morning to night just to put bread on the table?" And one day when he was working, chiseling stone out of a mountain, lost in thought, he hears a commotion in the distance. So he climbs higher up and he sees below there's a grand parade. The king was passing by, and there were crowds lining the sides of the road, shouting, "Long live the king!" and throwing flowers at the royal coach. And this simple stonecutter thought to himself, "Oh, it must be so amazing to be the king. I wish I could also be great and powerful. I want to be the king." And he didn't know it, but sometimes in life there comes a moment when our heart opens just enough for heaven to hear us clearly, and what we wish for in that instant can shape our path in ways we don't expect. Suddenly he found himself no longer a stonecutter. He was the king, sitting in the royal coach, drawn by white horses, wrapped in fine robes, and the crowd that was cheering was now cheering for him. And he said to himself, "I didn't make a mistake. Being the king is amazing. I am the strongest and most powerful person all around." But it didn't take long before he started feeling uncomfortable, because the sun was blazing down on him. He was sweating beneath his heavy robes, and he said to himself, "I thought I'm the king, and nothing is supposed to be more powerful than the king. But if the sun can humble me, then the sun must be mightier than the king. I want to be the sun." And just like that, he became the sun. He was glowing, and he was powerful. He gave light and heat to the whole world. He caused trees to grow and kings to sweat. And he said, "I am the most powerful force in the world." And as he's trying to make the king sweat, putting as much rays of the sun on the king as possible, a thick cloud drifted beneath him, hiding the sun's light. And the king was happy, but the sun was not. And the stone cutter, who was now the sun, he said, "If a cloud can stop the sun, then a cloud must be mightier than the sun. I want to be a cloud." And immediately he became a great dark cloud, heavy with rain. He poured water wherever he wished on the king, flooding valleys, drenching fields, blocking the sun completely. And he laughed. "Ha! I'm greater than the king and greater than the sun." Until he tried to go one direction, but a strong wind came and pushed him the opposite way. And he says, "What's going on here? The wind is stronger than the cloud? Then I want to be the wind." And he became the wind, roaring over the oceans, lifting waves like mountains, tearing through the forest, crashing trees to the ground, and of course finding the king and blowing him off of his carriage. And he said, "Now I'm the mightiest. Nothing is more powerful than me." But then he met something that he couldn't move. No matter how hard he blew, the mountain that stood before him stood tall, firm, and unmoved. And he said, "The mountain is mightier than the wind, so I want to be the mountain." And he became a mountain, tall, solid, unmoving, with his peak above the clouds. The wind couldn't touch him. The sun didn't bother him. He stood strong and proud, and he said, "Now I am the greatest power that exists." But suddenly he felt this sharp pain. Something was cutting into his side. He looked down, and there, at the base of the mountain, stood a man with a hammer and a chisel, a stone cutter. He said, "What is this? If someone can cut pieces out of me, then he must be stronger than I am. I want to be that man that's stronger than a mountain." And in an instant, he was transformed once again, back into a stone cutter, back into himself. The very thing he was running away from was the place of his greatest strength. The humble stone cutter, breaking rocks on the mountain, had power to reshape the mountain itself. The mountain could stop the wind could move the clouds could block the sun, and the sun could burn the king. The stone cutter could carve into the mountain. And this simple stone cutter learned that the greatest power in the world was being exactly who he was supposed to be. May we all merit to recognize the holiness in our own portion, the strength in our own purpose, and the beautiful truth that Hashem placed us exactly where we need to be to bring light, good, and abundance into His world. I have another story for you. This is a story about Reb David Leis, who was one of the closest Chassidim of the Baal Shem Tov, who lived from approximately 1700 to 1787. He was one of the towering figures in the early generations of Chassidus, and the grandfather of many Chassidic Rebbes, including the Skver Rebbe, Reb Matel of Chernobyl, and he was the rabbi in the city of Bar in Ukraine. Now, most people, until probably penicillin was discovered, lived an average life of maybe 40, 50 years maximum. But there were always exceptions. There were always people that lived to 100 years or more, even in old or ancient times. It was such a rare thing. It was almost as if you lived 2 or 3 lifetimes. And Reb David was one of those people. He was nearly 100 years old, and he had been the head of the Beit Din, the chief Dayan, in the city that he was in. But as he got to be so old, the other Dayanim, the other rabbinical judges of the city, began taking care of the simpler shilas, the easier questions in Jewish law. But when there was a truly difficult case, they would turn to Reb David for his wisdom, and also he had Ruach HaKodesh. He had divine inspiration. One morning that turned out would be Reb David's last day in this world, there was a difficult case that came before the Beit Din, and the Dayanim wanted to consult him as always, but his family said not to disturb him because he was weak and frail and close to his final moments. But from his bed, Reb David could hear the discussion outside the room, and he gathered every bit of strength he had left in his body, pulled himself up, and called for his family to come in. And when they entered the room, the tzaddik struck the table with such force that one of its legs broke off. He said, "It says that any Dayan who judges a din, a judgment truthfully, becomes as if they were a partner with Hashem in the works of creation. And just because I'm weak and old, you want to take this partnership away from me? Tell all of the judges they should come in at once." They came in quickly, surrounding his bedside. Reb David listened carefully as they explained the case, his eyes burning with the same clarity they had had decades before. And he guided them step by step until they reached the true ruling, pure and clear. And moments later, he said Shema and returned his holy neshama to its maker. The last act of Reb David Leis in this world was to fulfill the very words he had just spoken, to stand as a partner with Hashem in the work of creation. And I love this story so much because it just shows you, Rabbi Nachman said, you're not allowed to get old. Now, of course, you're allowed to grow old. Your body ages, you're going to become old, but he meant in your mind, not to see yourself as an old person. I've seen, I'm sorry to say this, 13-year-old Haredi kids that walk like they're old men. And I've seen old people who treat themselves as old people. And I've seen old people who refuse to be old. And Reb David refused to be old. Even though he was almost 100 years old, in a time when nobody lived that long, he burnt with the fire of the Baal Shem Tov. The fire of serving Hashem, and it's my blessing. I'll bless you, and you'll bless me back, Be'ezrat Hashem, that we all have long and healthy lives, and we live lives like Reb David, that even on our final day, we're standing with passion, serving Hashem with strength, and we leave this world with an act of holiness. Be'ezrat Hashem. Thank you so much for listening. As always, my sweetest friends, it was such a pleasure to record the stories again. I really missed it. Now I have to edit all these stories, which by the time you listen to this, I will have edited them. That I like less. Looking forward to the day when AI can do some of the work for me. Not yet. I've tried. It doesn't do a very good job, so continuing to do the manual editing for now. And I want to thank all the listeners and, of course, all the supporters of the podcast. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, everyone who saw me during the Chagim and wrote to me and have been in touch with me. I just want you to know, I know you listen to the podcast in your car or in your headphones or however you listen to it in your house. And I don't know most of you personally, but I want you to know that I really feel you when I'm recording. I feel the listeners are there. And I know that even though I don't know you personally, I do have a personal connection with you because I'm the sound in your ears every week. And I just want to thank you for trusting me and allowing me to share these stories. It's something that I simply have to do. I can't live without it. And it would be no fun to tell the stories without an audience. And so you, my friends, are the stonecutter. You are the most powerful force for me, the listeners. So thank you, my sweetest friends. I hope everything you davened for on the high holidays comes true in a good and revealed positive way. And now we're heading towards Hanukkah, Be'ezrat Hashem. So until next week, my sweetest friends, have a good Shabbos and have a good week and a good Chodesh. And sei gesund.